Zimbabwe needs a reset. The conversation nobody in power wants to have. Where's Zimbabwe? Welcome back, Pamzinda Wevan. Now, I want to do something a little different. Every day this week, we have been covering the drama, the t-shirts, the death threats, the poisoning. I mean, that's our Sunday. It's a new week, but you know what I'm saying. Chikava death threats, the poisoning allegations, the military promotions, the social media wars, and all of that is real. All of that matters. All of that needs to be reported and discussed loudly. But I want to zoom all the way out because there are some brilliant academic and legal minds who are having a conversation that goes deeper than the daily drama. A conversation that asks not just what is happening in Zimbabwe right now, but why does it keep happening? Why does Zimbabwe keep arriving at the same crossroads? Faction versus faction, strongman versus strongman, crisis versus crisis, decade after decade after decade. Big question, Zimbabwe. So, and the answer they are arriving at is uncomfortable. So, because it implicates not just Mnangagwa, not just ZANU-PF, not just the 2030 faction, it implicates the entire political system that Zimbabwe has been operating under since Vamna 1980. And fixing it requires something much harder than removing one man or blocking one bill. It requires a national reset. Pull up your chair, family, because this conversation right here is the conversation that actually decides Zimbabwe's future. Not just for the next 7 years, for the next 50. COUP 3, a symptom, not the disease. COUP 3 is just a symptom. Let us start with the most important reframe of this entire crisis. And it is one that most of the daily commentary, including ours, does not say loudly enough. COUP 3 is not the problem. COUP 3 is a symptom. Think about it this way. If you wake up every morning with a headache, you can take painkillers every day. The headache goes away temporarily. But if you never ask why the headache keeps coming back, if you never check whether there is a tumor or a high blood pressure, or a structural problem, you are just managing symptoms forever. And one day, the painkiller stops working. COUP 3 is not an isolated aberration, but part of continental pattern of constitutional capture. It mirrors Uganda's scrapping of the term limits in 2005 and 2017. Rwanda's 2015 referendum that extended Paul Kagame's rule, and Cameroon's 2008 removal of limits that entrenched Paul Biya's decades-long presidency. Each of these cases demonstrates how legal frameworks are manipulated not to expand rights, but to entrench ruling elites, bending constitutions into instruments of permanence rather than renewal. So, Zimbabwe is not unique. Zimbabwe is not special in its dysfunction. Zimbabwe is following a continental pattern, a pattern that has repeated itself across Africa for decades. Because the underlying conditions that produce that pattern have never been genuinely addressed. So, what are those conditions? It's a winner-take-all political system. A culture where losing an election means losing everything. Your freedom, your assets, your safety. A security establishment that has been politicized beyond repair. An economy so distorted by patronage that the line between business and politics is invisible. And a history of political violence so deeply embedded that even people who claim to want democracy have learned to use forces as first resort rather than what? The last one. So today's tensions, including debates around constitutional amendment bill, such as COUP 3, reflect not a contest over democratic principles, but a struggle over succession within the same political framework. The system remained intact after 2017. Only the individuals at the top changed. Murubabat, read that last statement. Repeat that last statement. Only the individuals at the top changed. The system, the structures, the incentives, the culture, the winner-take-all architecture stayed exactly the same. And now that same architecture is producing exactly the same crisis with different names at the top, but the same dynamics underneath. Removing Mugabe did not fix Zimbabwe. Blocking COUP 3 alone will not fix Zimbabwe either. Unless the underlying system changes, we will be back here again. Zimbabwe, we don't want that. With different names, making the same videos, having the same conversations. Let's talk about the violence culture, where it comes from and why it persists. Now, this is the part of the conversation that makes people uncomfortable because it requires us to look at history honestly, including the parts of history that are inconvenient for everyone. Zimbabwe's political culture has been described by analysts as one that instrumentalized violence, made it a tool, normalized it, treated it as a legitimate instrument for gaining and retaining power. And the question being asked in academic circles is, where did that come from? And how do you unlearn it? The culture of violence in politics. Twitter saying I. The fight for Zimbabwe's independence was fought for land and the sacred principle of one man, one vote. Yet the political actors who fought that fight have presided over a system that has repeatedly violated both. The liberation struggle in Zimbabwe was a violent conflict. It had to be. The Rhodesian state was itself built on violence and did not respond to peaceful resistance. But what the analysts being discussed today are pointing out in the political culture formed during that struggle. The culture of command, of discipline through force, of zero tolerance for dissent within the movement. And it was never decomposed after independence, that culture. It was simply transferred from the battlefield to the state house, from the war against Rhodesia to the war against political opposition. So the hearings on COUP 3 have been anything but participatory. They descended into a theater of coercion. In Chitungwiza, men were assaulted on camera simply for voicing dissent. Civil society groups and eyewitnesses allege that some individuals vanished after opposing the bill. Vanished. People vanishing for attending public hearings. In 2026, this is the same tactic that was used in Gukurahundi in the 1980s. The same tactic used in 2008 when Morgan Tsvangirai won the first round of elections, and the response was a campaign of violence so brutal that he withdrew from the runoff to save his supporters' lives. The tactics are refined, the technology is different, but the underlying logic, use fear to silence dissent, is unchanged. A constitutional amendment ought to embody the highest expression of collective will, yet COUP 3 is being forced through as a top-down imposition. Citizens are not being consulted. They are being coerced. The violence at hearings is not incidental. It is symptomatic of a broader authoritarian drift, a deliberate strategy to hollow out participatory governance and replace it with fear. Zimbabwe. All right, and here is the most important point that the academic discussion raises. You cannot build genuine democracy on top of a political culture that still fundamentally believes violence is a valid tool. You can hold elections, you can write constitutions, you can have term limits and separation of powers and all the institutional architecture of democracy. But if the people operating those institutions still fundamentally believe at the core that when it really matters, force wins, then the institutions are just decoration. So the roadmap, Zimbabwe, what a genuine reset looks like. What do you do? Is Zimbabwe hopeless? Is this just the way it is going to be forever? No. And this is where the conversation gets genuinely hopeful, even if it is also genuinely hard. The academics and legal voices being discussed in my reports are right now in the circles of the academics are proposing what they call a political transformation program, a multi-year structured, inclusive process for rebuilding Zimbabwe's political architecture from the foundation up. Not a quick fix, not a band-aid, a genuine reset. And it has 4 pillars. Let me walk you through each one. Pillar number 1, an inclusive national dialogue. Though my academics, they are encouraging right now, Chiwenga must lead this thing. Not a dialogue between ZANU-PF and the main opposition. Not a dialogue between Mnangagwa and Chiwenga. A genuine inclusive dialogue One that includes the church, which has already shown it has moral authority and a national platform. The opposition in all its fragments, civil society, the diaspora, which represents millions of Zimbabweans who have left but still care deeply and still send money home. That keeps families alive. And yes, even the cartels, even the security elite, even the people who currently hold power and are afraid of what accountability looks like. Because here's the counterintuitive truth that historical transitions teach us. You cannot build a sustainable peace deal that excludes the people who have the guns. You cannot build a sustainable economic recovery that excludes the people who control the capital. You can defeat them, but defeating them does not make them disappear. They go underground. They fund spoilers. They destabilize from the shadows. The transitions that have worked in South Africa, in Colombia, in various post-conflict societies worked because they found a way to give even the bad actors something in the deal. Not impunity, not a free pass for crimes, but a path, a way to step back without facing total annihilation. Zimbabwe. The most significant challenge remains the fear held by the current elite regarding accountability and the loss of assets. Any dialogue must provide something in it for them. A way to step back without facing total liquidation, similar to historical negotiated transitions in other nations. But to move back from the positions of power. So this is not about protecting criminals. This is about political engineering, about designing a process that gives enough people enough of a reason to participate rather than sabotage. Because a national dialogue that the powerful refuse to join or join only to destroy is not a dialogue. It is a performance. So, Pillar 2, Zimbabwe, the academics are suggesting in Zimbabwe, electoral reform. Moving away from the winner-take-all system toward a mixed member or proportional representation system ensures that losing an election does not mean losing everything, thereby reducing the fear of losing power that currently drives retributive and violent politics. This is the structural fix that most people do not talk about because it is not as dramatic as an assassination plot or a constitutional amendment. But it might be the most important single change Zimbabwe could make to its political system. Right now, in Zimbabwe's winner-take-all system, if your party loses the election, you lose everything. The presidents, the ministries, the access to state resources, the protection of the security establishment, everything. And that means that for the people currently in power, losing an election is existential. It is not just politically embarrassing. It is potentially life-threatening because they know what they have done while in power. And they know what a new government with full access to the books might find. When the cost of losing is that high, people will do anything to avoid losing, including stealing elections, including political violence, including constitutional amendments that remove the people's right to choose their president. But if you change the system, if you move to proportional representation, where even a party that gets 30% of the vote gets 30% of the seats and 30% of the power, then losing is survivable. Then the opposition is not an enemy to be destroyed, but a competitor to be defeated at the next election. And that changes the entire political culture over time. Pillar 3, Zimbabwe, changes are suggested. Institutional revitalization. Reforms must be advanced that decentralize power and entrench civic protections, ensuring that no future amendment can be weaponized. This means rebuilding judicial independence. Right now, when constitutional lawyers raise legitimate legal objections to COUP 3 and the government's response is to have the deputy chief secretary publicly rebuke them, the judiciary's independence is effectively being challenged from the executive. That cannot stand. Courts must be genuinely independent. Judges must be appointed through transparent processes that insulate them from political pressure. It means professionalizing the security sector, Zimbabwe, removing partisan figures from command positions, building a military and police service that understands institutionally, not just in theory, that their loyalty is to the constitution and the people, not to a president, not to a faction, not to whoever signs their promotion orders. And it means rebuilding the public service. Zimbabwe is an educated diaspora, Zimbabwe, scattered across the whole world. Doctors, engineers, lawyers, academics, financial experts, who left because the system failed them. A genuine reset creates conditions for those people to come back home. Not just because they are patriotic, but because Zimbabwe becomes a place where your expertise is valued more than your political connections. And then the pillar number 4, addressing the fear factor. Yeah, the violences. And this is the hardest one. The one that requires the most political courage from everyone at the table. The current elite is afraid, not of you personally, not of any individual Zimbabwean. They are afraid of accountability. They are afraid of what happens to their assets, their freedom, their families if power changes hands and a new government starts asking questions. That fear is what is driving CAP 3. That fear is what is driving the assassination allegations. That fear is what bought MPs with cars and cash. That fear is what printed t-shirts in Johannesburg. Not confidence, not strength, fear. Tiri kuhlanana. Vakuru vanotihla. Isu vadoko tiri kuhlawo vakuru. Vakuru vanosvati kuti vakaluza power, isu vadoko zvatichavaita. Ma1. And the way to address the fear is not to pretend it does not exist. It is to design a transition process that takes it seriously, that offers pathways, not impunity, but pathways, Zimbabwe, truth and reconciliation mechanisms, asset recovery frameworks that are graduated rather than confiscatory, amnesty for political crimes that falls short of the most serious human rights violations. This is not about letting criminals off the hook. This is about building a transition that is durable. Because a transition built entirely on punishment, where the losers face total destruction, produces the same dynamic on the other side. The new winners become desperate to hold power as the old ones were. And the cycle continues. The 2028 problem. Why another election without reform is not enough. Tikangopinda kuma elections na 2028. Zvangomira sezvizvi. Hapana zvichita. Here is the point that I think is most politically relevant right now. And it connects directly to everything we have been covering this month. Even if CAP 3 is blocked, even if Mnangagwa does not get his 7 years, even if the 2028 elections happen on schedule, without the reforms we just discussed, those elections will produce another crisis. Critics argue that rushing toward another election without fundamental electoral reforms, reforms mandated by the 2013 Constitution but never fully implemented, will only lead to another disputed and non-credible outcome, similar to 2023. Similar to 2023, Zimbabwe, when the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission announced the results, that the opposition, civil society, international observers, and a significant portion of ZANU-PF's own base viewed with deep suspicion. When the diaspora vote was still not implemented, when voter roll irregularities were documented but not addressed, when the results came in faster than credible counting could happen. If 2028 happens in those same conditions, with the same ZEC, the same voters roll management, the same partisan security apparatus, the same media environment, then blocking CAP 3 just delays the crisis by two years. Because whoever loses 2028 will not accept the results, and whoever wins will govern without genuine legitimacy. And the cycle starts again. Zimbabwe has yet to hold elections, widely regarded as free, fair, and credible. The same political actors central to previous disputed elections remain at the heart of today's succession debates. This is the uncomfortable truth that gets lost in the daily drama of who is threatening to shoot whom and who promoted whose son. The institutional rot goes all the way down. And building on rotted foundations, even with a new political caste at the top, does not produce a different building. Oh, Zimbabwe. All right, the international angle. Is the world watching? All right, one more layer that the daily coverage misses. What is the international community doing? The African Union met with lawmakers in Zimbabwe in April 2026 to discuss the constitutional reform process. while highlighting Zimbabwe's sovereignty and right to determine their constitutional agenda. The European Union ambassador to Zimbabwe legitimized the restructuring of governance, arguing that Zimbabwe has a right to determine its government structure and the EU has no authority to intervene. Right, translation, the international community is largely going to let this happen, as long as it is peaceful, as long as it goes through a legal process, even a deeply flawed one. The AU and the EU are not going to ride in and save Zimbabwe's democracy. That is not how international relations works. It is almost certain that Zimbabwe will pass COUP 3 within the next few weeks. An international security institute said that. Almost certain, not because it is popular, not because it is constitutional, but because ZANU-PF has the parliamentary numbers, the resources, and the institutional control to push it through. And the world will watch and issue statements and move on, which means, and I cannot say this strongly enough, the only people who can genuinely save Zimbabwe's democracy right now are Zimbabweans. The ordinary citizens who went to public hearings and said no. The students who distributed flyers knowing they might be abducted. The war veterans who petitioned parliament. The senators who still might find the courage to be the 3 votes that block this thing. The lawyers who are fighting in courts. The journalists who are reporting at personal risk. The content creators who are keeping the conversation alive. And yes, the diaspora who watches and shares and keeps the pressure on from abroad. My diaspora, they are keeping the pressure on. That is your power, Zimbabwe. It is not the power of tanks or constitutional amendments at $10,000 envelopes. It is the power of a people who refuse to be silent, who keep talking, who keep informing each other, who keep building the consensus that the academics and legal minds are describing as the only genuine path forward. So, Chichivara Zimbabwe, let me leave you with the question that sits at the heart of everything we have discussed today. What kind of Zimbabwe do we actually want? Not what kind of Zimbabwe do we want Mnangagwa to build. Not what kind of Zimbabwe do we want Chiwenga to build. Not what kind of ZANU-PF, what kind of Zimbabwe ZANU-PF wants. Not what the opposition wants. What do we, the people, the citizens, the Zimbabweans who wake up every morning and live with the consequences of every political decision made in the building on Samora Machel Avenue, who do we want? What do we want? Because that question, genuinely answered, collectively discussed, honestly wrestled with, is the beginning of the national reset. It is the conversation that has stopped, but that has to happen before the dialogue, before the electoral reform, before the institutional revitalization. You have to know what you are building toward before you can start laying the foundation. What do we want? Not even who do we want, what do we want? For Zimbabwe to become a functional jewel again, it must move toward a political discourse that recognizes the legitimacy of differing views and prioritizes commitment to the country over functional loyalty. A jewel. Zimbabwe was a jewel, Zimbabwe. It was called the breadbasket of Africa. It had one of the highest literacy rates on the continent. It had universities, hospitals, infrastructure, agricultural exports. It had a future that its people believed in. That future is not gone permanently. It is buried under decades of bad governance, political violence, economic mismanagement, and elite capture. But it is still there. The people are still there, talented, educated, resilient, creative, capable of building something extraordinary if the political conditions allow it. So the national reset is not a dream. It is a choice. And the window to make that choice genuinely, collectively, inclusively is right now. Before the elections, before the next crisis, before the next set of t-shirts gets printed in Johannesburg. Drop your thoughts in the comments, Zimbabwe. Do you believe a genuine national dialogue is possible in Zimbabwe? Who would you want at that table? And what is the one thing, the single most important reform that you believe Zimbabwe must make to break this cycle? Let us have that conversation right now, right here. Because the channel where Zimbabweans talk honestly about their future is the channel that is building something that outlasts any political moment. This is your boy, Pano Pamzindawevan, thoughtful today, fearless always, pro-democracy forever. Peace.